so nice of you to be here this evening. I'm Michelle Anderson, the president of Brooklyn College, and this is an exciting night for us. It is the second in a series, the presidential lecture series here at the college, and the lecture series seeks to expose students and the larger community to innovative ideas, courageous leadership, and just new thought leaders overall. We're excited tonight to have a number of luminaries possibly in the house. I'm not sure that I saw them, but Assemblymember Radnis Bishat and New York City Council member Farah Louie will probably join us a little bit later on this evening. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Martin and Syma Mendelsohn Lectureship in International Relations, an important lectureship that focuses on global affairs. We have a very special guest with us this evening, Ambassador Patrick Gaspard, the president and CEO of the Center for American Progress, which is the leading progressive think tank in the nation. Ambassador Gaspard is a Haitian-American political strategist, a civil rights leader, and a diplomat. Over decades, he's been deeply engaged in community organizing and political leadership here in New York City. He's worked with David Dinkins, Al Sharpton, Margarita Lopez, Bill de Blasio, Yvette Clarke, and others. He was the national political director for Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign, and then was appointed in the White House to the position of Director of the Office of Political Affairs. He then became Executive Director of the Democratic National Committee when Obama ran for re-election in 2012. In 2013, he was appointed to serve as the U.S. Ambassador to South Africa. I hope this evening to be able to touch on a number of these different eras in his fantastic career trajectory. He's been a vocal advocate for progressive causes throughout his career. Ambassador Gaspard, it is such an honor to have you with us this evening. Thank you so much for coming. Let's start with your origin story. I know that you were born in Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Can you share with us the family story that led to that and then to New York City?
I'm happy to do that, President Anderson, but first let me just thank you for that overly generous introduction. Thank you for welcoming me here to this wonderful campus, and thank you to this extraordinary audience for turning out to hopefully be in conversation with us this evening. I will say, before I get into any bit about myself, I'm a little embarrassed that at the top you described me as a civil rights leader. I would never, ever call myself that. I've been fortunate to be mentored and taken under the wings of actual civil rights leaders, and there's no way I can begin this conversation today without acknowledging that a mighty tree fell today across the Black Atlantic with the loss of my dear friend and longtime mentor, Harry Belafonte. And the conversation that I'm having tonight, I'm offering up to the spirit of his leadership and the enormous contributions that he made. I get a little emotional talking about Mr. B. And you know, you were mentioning some folks that I was lucky enough to work with. One of them is one of your alum. On my way down here, driving through all kinds of traffic, I got a call just commiserating with Reverend Al Sharpton about the loss of Harry Belafonte. And I told him that I was coming to speak at Brooklyn College. And he said, well, you know, he said, I don't know if I'm still in good standing over there, so you may not want to mention my name as an alum. You're right, I was born in the Congo from parents who were from Haiti. And we're in the Congo because it was interesting to be born in the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, which was neither democratic or a real republic at the time of my birth. It still is challenged to be either thing today, 55 years later. My parents left Haiti, my father first, during the decade of the 1960s. It was a time when he was a newly minted young lawyer in a country where for some foolish reason, he believed there ought to be some ability to have free, open elections in the country, full-on democratic participation, inclusive citizenry. Francois Duvalier, Papa Doc, who was in power at the time, didn't exactly see eye to eye with my father and a generation of activist leaders on that score. And one day, my father always joked about this, my mother did as well. My father found himself at the business end of a shotgun one day, and he was told in no uncertain terms that if he and his cohort didn't cease and desist their agitation, they would be disappeared. He knew this was no idle threat because his brother-in-law, my mother's brother, had been disappeared, never to be seen again. And so many of that incredible generation of Haitian intellectuals and activists either ended up in prisons like Fort Dimanche or ended up buried underground or left the country. Fortunately for my father and for so many others, this period coincided with a time when there was this nascent independence movement in the African continent. Patrice Lumumba had come into power in the Congo. After kicking out the Belgian and the French educators, they put out a call for French-speaking educators from throughout the African diaspora to come to educate the next generation of leaders in that country. And my father and many, many others decamped into the Congo in that moment, in that spirit of liberation, and were able to share the best of themselves with the new hope for the continent. My mother eventually joined my father in the Congo, and I eventually happened, as did my other siblings, and we eventually migrated here to the US. My father always liked to joke that he left Haiti to get away from Duvalier, eventually had to leave the Congo to get away from Mobutu Sese Seko in the Congo, and arrived here in the US where Richard Nixon was in power and wasn't sure that he had done appreciably better. You know, I will tell you, as I think about my father, who's been gone for some time now. He passed away in 2011. I remember that my father, his people are from the town of Lectureship in Haiti. And that's a really special place, and an important place when I think about issues of diaspora and what it means to bring our people together across divides. Lectureship is famously the port that Simon Bolivar sailed from in 1815, and again in 1816, when he came to Haiti at the invitation of then President Pétion in Haiti, and Haitians gave Simon Bolivar, I think something like 5,000 muskets and some soldiers to go back into South America to liberate his people and to spread the flame of independence that, of course, came from the Haitian Revolution in 1804 straight through Latin America. Pétion asked of one thing of Simon Bolivar: when you get freedom in your homeland, free the slaves as well. So that connection across diaspora, across black and brown, is something that mattered then, mattered in the town my father came from, and continues to inform how I think about my own activism on domestic and foreign policy issues in the U.S. Sorry to take that little bit of a journey.
No, it's a great, it's not a detour at all. Let's stick with this issue of Haiti. You know, the pandemic, the economic crisis, a series of earthquakes, the assassination of its president, have exacerbated political instability there. As you know, more than 90,000 Haitian Americans call Brooklyn their home, and many of our students are Haitian American. We have a Haitian Studies Institute here led by Dr. Lily Surratt, who is in the audience. Hi, Lily. And we are really pleased about our connection to the Haitian diaspora. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, how can members of the Haitian diaspora and their allies support Haiti right now?
God, that is such a big, big question. Haiti can be, can vex one in an everlasting way if you care deeply about Haiti, as I do and as so many do here. Brooklyn is the nexus of all realities for Haitians throughout the world. We have such density in this incredible town. So it's challenging to answer a question about Haiti with the leader of your institute here, and difficult to talk about issues of history when you have actual historians in the room like Eric Alterman, who teaches here at Brooklyn College. But if I could, I'd never want to answer questions about Haiti or any place really with a sense of only the proximate challenges. If one is really going to be invested in transformational work in Haiti and throughout the region, you have to pull back, telescope, and appreciate that the challenges that exist in Haiti today didn't just spring up overnight. They didn't just come to existence when CNN went down to the border and realized that there was a new crisis of Haitians who were coming up from the pass at Del Rio. The United States has played a terribly important role, emphasis on terribly, in the course of that history and needs to play a role going forward. There is a vibrant diaspora here in the United States, which has some agency in cities like New York and in Miami, but has relatively little power in the national conversation. And I've been trying with so many others to change the reality of that. I'll give you a for instance. I'm a supporter of President Biden. I've known him for a long time, ever since he was in the U.S. Senate working on Haiti issues. But it wasn't lost on me that when early on in the Biden administration, when Cubans took to the streets of Havana to protest against the challenges in their regime, President Biden described it as a clarion call for freedom and transparency. And yet a few months later, when Haitians took to the streets of Port-au-Prince to protest against corrupt leadership that had the support and endorsement of the U.S. Embassy, the White House said that this was disturbing, disruptive, and one had to be concerned about instability on the island. Same kind of demonstration, very different response to the hue and cry for democratic outcomes there. So I'd say that there's an influence game, an agency game, a leverage game that Haitian Americans need to be engaged with. My father's generation focused entirely on politics back home. My generation of activists focused entirely on politics here. This new generation of activists has the opportunity to be the third leg of the stool, to bring it all together and to realize that outcomes there and outcomes here are co-determined. And for the first time, I believe we have a deep, vibrant, sophisticated civil society in Haiti that cuts across women's groups and LGBTQ groups and groups that are working on labor issues in Haiti and agrarian organizers in Haiti and clergy groups. It's extraordinary. We have sophisticated civil society there, and we have a diaspora that is finally mature enough to step back and to defer to civil society in Haiti about their ambitions. There's this collective that's come together called the Montana Accord that I believe has given expression to what a democratic transition could look like in Haiti. I believe that ought to be supported, and I think that real pressure needs to be brought to bear on the U.S. State Department, on the Canadians, on the French, and on the UN Security Council that's actually about to have a meeting about Haiti 2 days from now to support that accord and to force the current regime into transitional negotiations with that civil society. I could go on for probably 10 more hours about Haiti. We won't do that, but from the moment that U.S. Marines landed in Haiti at the behest of a sugar company in what year was that, 1915, thereabouts, to this moment now, the U.S. has played an outsized role in Haitian economy, Haitian culture, Haitian political outcomes, and we've got to press them to be oriented towards real democratic outcomes there.
Your career history spans local organizing, very local organizing, national organizing, and then being on the international stage, which in some ways circles back to your personal and family history. You've talked about Black internationalism as a key part of your own personal history and the way you think about these three areas of work. Can you talk about what you have learned at each? This isn't part of my notes. It sort of comes from what you've talked about. You know, I'm thinking about your immersion in New York City politics, your leadership at the national level in the Obama administration, and then the work you're doing thinking about international demands for human rights across a whole range of societies. Can you talk about a little bit about what you've learned in those different arenas?
I'm happy to, but let's throw away the notes,
I know.
President Anderson. Let's just have a little bit of fun with everybody here. We don't need no notes. I always, it's so funny when you pull back and you think about your own life or any of your journeys. When you get to a certain point in it, there's a self-rationalization that begins to kick in, and you convince yourself that there's a through line, and that things happen for a particular reason, and that there was a kind of order to it. My son, who's a year removed from graduating from NYU, is sitting here, so I always have to pretend in conversations with him that there was a roadmap, and I knew all along the way what I was doing, but there was disorder. To much of it, but the thing that for me kind of seemed to always be an animating part of the story is always a commitment and investment to something larger than myself, a sense of a kind of radical citizenship that I was obligated to take up wherever I was in community or in institution, a determination always to hold on to my sense of newness in every space that I walked into, right? I've now been in this country, of course, ever since I was a toddler, but it's powerful to always still be able to, in a way, step out and step back and look back upon ourselves in a way that I think comes with the right level, an appropriate level of interrogation, and not just accepting my own assumptions about where we're at in our history and the direction that we're headed towards. So for me, from my earliest activism that I kind of stumbled into, to the work that I do now at the Center for American Progress, I've always tried to center some notion of servant leadership, some notion of the responsibility of citizenship, and the one thing that I've always learned to hold fast to is a sense of humility. Are you okay?
I'm totally fine. I don't know where this is from. It's like I just need a lozenge or something. I'm so sorry.
No, we're going to get you a lozenge. I'm sure someone's going to come right up on stage to it.
I'm fine.
Those are things that have kind of informed the journey, but what I've really managed to learn and to learn over and over and over again is that there's a need with humility to fail spectacularly, to always appreciate what it means to lose, but to lose in a way where you're falling forward, taking up lessons of that loss and being clear about why you entered the fray in the first place. The notion of failing spectacularly is one that, unfortunately, as an immigrant, as a progressive, as somebody on the left who's worked on issue-based campaigns and electoral campaigns, I've learned that lesson over and over and over again. I remember at some point in the Obama campaign in 2008, it was late in the campaign, and I'm having a conversation in a room with some of the best organizers in the campaign, the best strategists in the campaign, and I was just on my game that day and just like giving them a sense of what I thought we ought to do in this cluster of states, what the message should be, how we should move our forces and use our resources. And I remember someone afterwards saying to me, "You were really good today. Like, where'd you get those that notion from?" And I said, I learned the hard way, man. I've lost more campaigns than you will ever participate in. And knowing how to lose and appreciating the lessons that you have to take up in daring to have the courage to enter into the arena and making yourself vulnerable to the life lessons of loss, for me, has like been the thing that's been the most instructive.
Well, so let's talk about your work as ambassador, U.S. ambassador to South Africa. You don't want to?
No, I'm just.
Well, maybe.
Let's have that conversation. It's just, I will tell you that the more distance I get from that service, the more challenging it is to be as transparent as I'd like to be about it. And I'll explain that as I take your question.
Well, let's start with what you just said. Where'd you lose there? How'd you lose there?
South Africa in that moment, in that period, was incredibly painful for me. Found my spirit as an organizer around this notion of pushing back against my own government being on the wrong side of history. When I was a teenager, I remember being 16, 17 years old when my mother and father thought that I was in school, and instead I was cutting class and going to a rally about U.S. sanctions against apartheid. When I was 19 years old, the most incredible thing happened where the U.S. Congress, at the insistence of activists, overrode the veto pen of Ronald Reagan, right? Where he passed the sanctions bill out of Congress, Reagan vetoes the sanctions bill, and Democrats and Republicans come together after this massive national movement to override the most powerful pen in the world in his veto. So I'm 19 years old, and I think, wow, collective action works. We just did this extraordinary thing that's going to be transformational across the world. It's a moment. So for me, coming of age as an activist was always hinged on my political imagination about South Africa and what it made possible to interrogate in the world and to build on in the world.
So that's a win.
So that's a huge win, but I raised it for a reason. So fast forward decades later, and I have the extraordinary privilege to be appointed as U.S. Ambassador to South Africa. I arrive in South Africa. First time I went to South Africa, I was there with my brother, who's here as well. We were there in, 1991? It was right at the turning point for apartheid. I come back many decades later. I'm the U.S. Ambassador. The law of the land is no longer apartheid, but much of the architecture of apartheid is still very much in place. You still have 10% of the population owning like 90% of the land in the country. If you go into Johannesburg and you walk through the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, you would not believe that not only would you not believe it's a black majority country, you wouldn't think there are any black folk in the country at all, right? So all of that is still very much in place. And I'm still, driving out miles on the road and visiting miners who are working in the country, who are all black, who are in the extractive industry, who are receiving no direct benefit from the things that they're pulling up from under the ground that go into wedding bands across the world. So all of that still very, very much in place. And then I'm going to Cape Town. I couldn't say these things when I was in South Africa. I'm going into Cape Town, and I'm meeting with the captains of industry in South Africa at a moment when I'm having a spectacular failure in trying to relaunch the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is a trade agreement between the U.S. and 47 African nations. South Africa is standing in the way of the renewal of the act because of the agriculture sector, and I discover, of course, that the agriculture sector is all led by the same families that control the agriculture sector in the country during the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, 60s. You see where I'm going. Eventually get AGOA renegotiated, get a 10-year on-ramp for it, but did it in a fashion that at the end of the day, I'm confident, just kind of locked in certain advantages for those oligarchs and didn't, I think, spring open the opportunity that should have been available in the industrial sector for black South Africans. But that's mostly owed to the lack of engagement, activism from new black leadership themselves, who have political agency in the country, but have no real economic agency beyond a small group of elites. Very, very difficult to have those conversations when I was sitting in the U.S. Embassy, representing our government there. The more distance that I have from it, the more I'm challenged to be transparent about that kind of gut thing that I experienced then, and is still playing out in that country today. A nation of 55 million people uses like 70% of all of the energy on the continent, has most of the Wi-Fi in the continent, most of the banking that occurs in the rest of South Africa is led, the rest of Africa is led through South Africa, but those who control those interests are not the born free generation that came after apartheid who should have the world open to them now.
It raises the issue that you have talked about repeatedly, which is one of citizenship. And what does it mean to be a citizen? Obviously, South Africa's history is still very troubled by questions of citizenship and participation, full participation, economic participation. How do you think about citizenship for Black Americans?
It's a great question. I suspect that the fact that you're asking this question means that you paid a little bit of attention to a set of remarks that I gave to the NAACP
I did.
a few years ago. Okay, I thought maybe it came from there. See, it's good to throw the notes away and just like chat up a little bit. God, it's interesting, the notion of citizenship. I'm going to just say one last thing about South Africa and serving them. I'm going to come to your question. At one point, I think one of the most difficult moments I had in South Africa is when I was being asked by a U.S. corporation, a fast food company that you may have heard of, to lobby on their behalf when the health ministry in South Africa was trying to lower the amount of fast food restaurants that were coming into the country, the sugar content in their food. And when I refused to do so, I was accused by the lobbyist for that multinational corporation of not really taking up proper representation as American citizen of American interest in South Africa. So on this question of citizenship, so on this question I often think about my mother, who earned her citizenship the hard way, came to the U.S. in the early 1970s, did every job under the sun, was a domestic worker, a home care worker, worked as a crossing guard, worked in hospitals, worked in hotels, everything that she could to put food on the table, but to also kind of help build and create her own sense of diasporic community in her own unique way. An incredibly enterprising person who eventually decided that she was going to become an American citizen, even if my father didn't want to be an American citizen, because she thought it meant something and she loved the value of it. And appreciated the responsibility and the obligation, the give and take of it. So she became a citizen, eventually inspired me to do the same. And as I went through my own journey of citizenship in this country, and my own education about American history, it was really kind of an astonishing thing for me to appreciate that, forgive me for saying this to my fellow Americans, but it was astonishing as an immigrant to discover that I had in many instances a deeper and more nuanced sense of American history than my American-born and educated friends. It was really kind of like a perplexing thing to discover. But I also discovered through that there were extraordinary people like Frederick Douglass, for instance, who were not considered full-blooded Americans, but who gave so much more of themselves to the American ideal, the American constitutional ideal, than those who put their bloody signature on the actual document itself, and those who were the inheritors of that legacy. I was always inspired mostly by Black women in the civil rights movement, like Septima Clark, like Fannie Lou Hamer, like Ella Baker, who were not only the frontline workers, but the real educators and the real, the folks who put the real scaffolding around the infrastructure of the movement and held it together. And I thought that they took up a powerful and radical notion of citizenship that required them to put their own physical bodies on the line to assure this thing, this ideal into the future, and to kind of impose their will on history and to bend the arc themselves. Always like really been lifted up by that. And I've always felt that in a very humble way, the work that I had to take up as an organizer for healthcare workers in this town and then nationally. The work that I did working with the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, the work I took up on anti-police violence in New York and elsewhere, and then eventually the work that I was fortunate to be engaged in electoral politics was always informed by this sense of what you give back to the collective body, what it owes you, and what you press into the future. I'm kind of Thomas Paine obsessed. There's that little pamphlet of his is never far away from me, and if you go and reread Common Sense, because I know all of you have read Common Sense. If you go and you reread Common Sense, Thomas Paine does the work of explaining that at some point we are resisting and moving away from monarchy because it is an unholy, inappropriate representation of authority on earth, and we've got to move to some form of direct representation. But in Common Sense, Thomas Paine warns very, very clearly that at some point, as society grows, as our cities grow, as our nation grows, we're going to get to a point where we are further removed from the agency of our citizenship. We're going to vote for people who will go off and ride their horse and buggy into town, and they will cast votes on our behalf, and we're not going to be able to see in real time what they're doing and what they're saying. So every single day, we're all of us going to have to be vigilant to the ideals that we're holding forth in a revolutionary period, and making sure there's accountability back to first principle always. So in a moment, when I'm thinking about what life looks like post-COVID, at a moment when we are racing towards the commodification of artificial intelligence and thinking not at all about the real implications for society, but whether or not Google or this other one's going to get there first, at a moment when all that's going to blow up our concept of inclusive, participatory democracy, is going to increase the reliance of big money in political spaces. I hope that all of us are thinking about what citizenship means for us, what it means to have some kind of correspondence to government beyond casting a ballot, even beyond protest, and what it means to, irrespective of whatever you all end up doing in life, to always keep that chord attuned to that first principle.
Let's talk about history a little bit.
Because it's all corrupt. Sorry. I want to be a little provocative. I'm really hoping to stir some things up when we open this thing up.
So you talked about knowing more about U.S. history sometimes than folks who were born here.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
It is. And what's scarier still is what's happening in Florida and Texas and other places across the country where Republicans are trying to suppress the teaching of critical race theory, which is
not actually even taught anywhere in America.
Right. But in particular, they're interested in suppressing the centrality of, or the notion that slavery plays a central role in the history of this country, and that racial inequality is a stamp across a time here. And you've talked about trying to, that you think that you should learn history in reverse. And I wonder how we can learn history if it's being censored.
Yeah. I think I begin where William Faulkner was when Faulkner wrote "The Past Has Never Passed," right? Mm-hmm. So let me give you, just to try to understand what I think Republicans are actually doing in these states, I'm going to recount to you a little bit of a data exercise that some of my friends and I went through after the 2008 election. So we win the campaign in 2008, and a couple of days later, we're bored out of our minds. We haven't really started the transition yet. And there's no state to go run to, no doors to knock on, no commercials to run. So we're still sitting around in our little laboratory in Chicago, just kind of playing around with the results. And one of the folks in our boiler room said, I wonder if there are any counties anywhere in America, any precincts anywhere in America, where John McCain outperformed George W. Bush. And my first response was, absolutely not. It's impossible. George Bush set a record for the most votes ever attained by a Republican who ran nationally. And he outperformed John McCain by like tens of millions of votes. It's like not even close. There's nowhere in America that John McCain could have outperformed George W. Bush. And so the data guy says, okay, let's see if you're right. So he starts tooling around and starts finding these precincts where John McCain did indeed outperform George W. Bush. Where are these precincts? Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, Carolinas. I think you see where this is going, right? So he pulls all this out and says, wow, this is a really interesting thing. Here we had an open presidency. You didn't have an incumbent. Our candidate, Barack Obama, did not have like a 4-year record for people to vote against. John McCain ran one of the worst campaigns ever, where he's telling everybody there's no economic crisis, even while all the banks are going belly up. We won easily. That was a landslide victory. And yet we're finding all these precincts in the deep traditional South where John McCain is outperforming George W. Bush, who was a record setter in performance. What do you attribute that to? That can only be like, what's so different here that enables him to do that only in this part of the country? And it was pretty clear looking at that the old cleavages, the dividing lines that you could stretch back. You know, if you only believe in proximate history, you could stretch it back to the passage of the 1964 Voting Rights Act. If you want to go a little further, go back into Reconstruction. You could go even further before that to all kinds of compromises struck. But there's this geographic cluster where you have a consistency in what animates the electorate, what animates participation, and this sense of division that is basically unchecked, unchanged, ungoverned from generation to generation in this country. I don't believe that Republicans give a hoot about banning certain books. I don't think they give a rat's you-know-what about the 1619 project. I don't think they care all that. I'm talking about Republican leadership, those who are investing in these movements and who are doing all this work. I don't think they care that much about whether or not trans athletes have an opportunity to perform fully in sports, in schools, et cetera. There's something else that's at play here, right? They appreciate that politics is a space of emotion. All of politics is governed by hope and fear. That's it. Those are the two things that drive the decisions that everybody makes in politics, period. Forget about all the issues. It's really about that. And they know that they have an ability to tap into this fear and to metastasize it in a way that plays into their notion of a zero-sum win in politics, and they're gonna like turn up the temperature on it. Donald Trump is seen as like kind of the leader of this phenomena. He's not. He's just a savant of the information ecosystem that we live in today, and he has a deeper appreciation of this history than so many others do, and he knows how to turn up the temperature on it and how to exploit it. I think that there is an existential fear that exists amongst what I'll just call MAGA extremist leadership for the purpose of this conversation. That existential fear is driven by demographics. Right now, if you walk into Des Moines, Iowa, and you go into the public school system, you will discover that the majority of children in the public school system in Des Moines, Iowa, are children of color. First time that's ever happened in Des Moines, Iowa. So when they look at Des Moines, Iowa, and they know they have a rapidly aging and diminished white population in Iowa, in Ohio, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, and they see this new demographic surge in the country, they view it as an existential threat, and they are going to do whatever it takes to stem the tide of that existential threat, and they will play up all kinds of fears along all kinds of lines that will divide in order to stoke a base that will be disinterested in anything but that kind of a politics. That they know how to play to that anxiety, and they know how to play into it well. Conversely, I think that Democrats have been challenged to meet the moment of demographic shift in this country in a way that takes up the principle of economic inclusion that speaks to broad values of fairness and everybody kind of having an opportunity to get to the starting line at the same time. So there's a conversation that's not taken place in key parts of the country about what they've done to hollow out the industrial infrastructure and factory towns in America, the kind of investments that are necessary, and what it actually means to have immigration in this country that can allow America to still be, to still allow you to have an American century and to allow America to be more competitive than ever. Quiet as it's kept, there are something like there are 900,000 900,000 immigrants that were sworn in as U.S. citizens last year. I think that immigrant density in workforce population grew by about 4 million last year, most especially amongst women. We're reversing a lot of the trends that we saw during the Trump years, where you're getting this explosion in workforce participation by immigrants, irrespective of the drama at the border. And I think that ultimately, we're going to see a comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, in those Midwestern states out into the Sun Belt, where a new America and a new economy emerges that ultimately trumps the, pun intended, the politics of performance around race in those old southern states. But it's going to take a minute.
Let's just briefly predict, because you're in a position to do so, you have the expertise to do so, predict what the future of the Democratic Party looks like, what the future of the Republican Party looks like. You know, the Dems have generational issues, an aging leadership, progressive base that doesn't turn out to vote as much as it should to support the team. Yeah. The Republicans are now no longer defending traditional conservative values. They are a cult of personality more than anything else at times. That's at least the critique of these two parties. How do you see these parties evolving? Where are we headed?
You always ask those really big, hard questions. So, you know, it's interesting. Have any of you read Timothy Schenck? So Timothy Schenck is a historian who just wrote a book called The Realigners, really interesting, where he talks about these cleavages in American society. And he reminds all of us, President Anderson, that everything old is new again. And despite the fact that, you know, we think that we are more polarized than we've ever been, we were kind of probably more polarized at the time of the Constitutional Convention than we are now. And certainly there was a civil war 150 years ago. So there must have been some kind of polarization in the country in the past. I'd rather not respond to that question from the perspective of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, but to step back and just talk about the nation itself.
Great, you know, we're divided. Talk about that, yeah.
I'm so hoping, and I say this as a former executive director of the Democratic National Committee and somebody who wears his partisanship on his sleeve, I just hope that we're going to have more and more states do things like what Alaska did a few years ago when it passed legislation that basically is diminishing partisan primaries and creating first past the post elections that enables you to rank your candidates and then take up those irrespective of their party affiliations, who come in first, second, third, or whatever, and end up selecting and choosing amongst those finishers in a final election. I actually think that we have to, and this is a strange thing for somebody who's like a former executive director of the Democratic Party to say, but I think that we have to reduce our focus on the massive ginormous two parties in this country, and instead just focus on what it means to overcome some of the cultural divides that we're seeing that are driven by geography, driven by economy, and all kinds of other things that I think we can develop some consensus around in ways that's difficult through generational inherited political habits of pulling the lever, because that's what we do in this way in this country. Increasingly, if you look at the patterns in American elections over the last 2 decades or so, at the local level, at the national level, our elections are starting to resemble more like, they're playing out in a way that's more like parliamentarian elections than elections for individuals who are running for office. I remember when I first got involved in political campaigns in this country around Jesse Jackson's presidential race in 1988. There used to be this thing called ticket splitters, right? And folks used to perform differently down ballot than they do up ballot. That does not exist in this country at all. We have a new idiom in politics for all of this. If somebody's voting for a Democrat, for a city council member, they're voting for a Democrat for state senate, they're doing the same darn thing in the House, in the Senate, and eventually ladders up to the presidency as well. When Barack Obama came into office and I was his political director, we had many, many Republicans who were sitting in seats that congressional districts that Barack Obama had won. We had many Democrats sitting in congressional districts that had been won by John McCain. It's not the case anymore. That's down to like a dozen on each side. We're run more like parliamentarian elections, and I think that's a real challenge going forward. The real cleavages in our society exist on the lines of education, economic income, and race as determined by geography, which is a complicated thing we're finding as you're now having large populations of Asian Americans who are living in places like North Carolina, for instance, in Georgia. It's kind of changing the electoral equation in some of those spaces. We're seeing a reverse migration with African Americans in this country that are moving from dense metropolitan centers into suburbs and less densely populated areas. For the first time in, I think, 50 years, majority of the black population in this country are no longer living in metro centers. That just kind of snuck up on us. We weren't expecting it and ready for it in the politics. COVID sped that up, and I think it's not going to deaccelerate anytime soon. So how we think about these divides, what it means to close these divides, I think is more complicated and more interesting than thinking about Democrats and Republicans. I have like this kind of ridiculous goal that one day I'm going to go to Ohio and I'm going to have the same conversation about economic advancement in a VFW hall in Columbus, Ohio, that I'll have with the NAACP chapter in Cleveland, Ohio. I can't do that right now. But I have like this aspiration that I'm going to get there on that front on this issue. I think it's, whether we're talking about the United States, or if we're talking about Brazil, if we're talking about Hungary, which I've spent some interesting time in as well, or if we're talking about Haiti, it's impossible to detangle the DNA strands of integrity of democracy from economic inclusion and advancement. People are cynical about democracy, and those institutions are vulnerable, particularly and especially since they're not seen as delivering on this notion of a fair shake for all and economic inclusion. It's great to be able to come and have this conversation in Brooklyn College. I will tell you that there are many spaces that I am not excited to engage in because spaces of higher education that I'm not excited to engage in because I feel as if they're just places where we're just locking in elite status and elite access. Brooklyn College shakes up that whole paradigm in higher education.
It does.
The whole Democrats and Republican thing kind of gets a little played for me.
So last question from me, and then we'll open it up for the audience to participate. What gives you hope? You talked about fear and hope as these two drivers of political forces and political actions. What gives you hope?
Oh my God, I'm always hopeful. I'm a radical optimist. I'm hopeful that, just the mere fact that on what is it? Is this a Tuesday night, a
Yep,
Wednesday night?
it's a Tuesday
It's
night.
a Tuesday night, a Tuesday night deep in Brooklyn. This many of us came together to have a conversation about civic discourse and the future. That makes me a radical optimist and really hopeful. I'm really optimistic. Today I had an invitation that I had to turn down because I had to zip back from Washington to come here, but I was going to get to meet with the Tennessee Three, who came to Washington to meet with President Biden in the White House, and I was going to get to see them this morning. They make me incredibly hopeful, but it's not just them, but the outpouring and the pushback that we see around the attempts that are being made in red state after red state to lift up a kind of policy secession from the rest of America. So we have these little kind of blue islands and seas of red, but we have folks who are engaged in brave, courageous, and thoughtful pushback every single day. That's an incredible thing. And I'm also optimistic. When I think about, I'm always trying to hold one person in mind in all of my organizing. And right now I'm thinking about a sister that I met in Columbia, South Carolina 3 months ago. I was invited by a group of workers who are across the South who have come together to try to create some collective action to push up the pressure on their ability to collectively bargain in right-to-work states in these countries. So these are all folks who are making minimum wage, subhuman standards, and this sister who was working at a Waffle House, who showed me like the burns on her arms, who talked to me about the kids that she's trying to take care of, just was giving me a pep talk right about this moment and telling me not to despair and not to be negative and that we could push through and overcome these challenges. So when I think about all the work that's to be done and what it means to get to that North Star, I'm thinking about that Waffle House sister, and she makes me a radical optimist in this moment. Despite the fact that I tried to provoke you by suggesting that there are many things that have been corrupted, the one thing that should never be corrupted is our spirits, right? And I think that our cynicism does their work for them. So, got to stay optimistic.
Got to stay positive. Maybe we'll take a couple questions from the audience.
I hope so. I hope more than a few.
In particular, it would be great to hear from a student. Yes. You do.
My name is Veronique Ignace.
Veronique, we've got a microphone for you.
Hello. My name is Veronique Ignace. I'm a doctoral student at CUNY SPH, actually. And a lot of what my work in public health is to merge public health, community organizing, and the arts. But specifically what I'm learning now is that that's really informed by my own upbringing in Flatbush. So immigrant populations is kind of my dedication, or what I'd like to dedicate my PhD to. So to that end, I'd like to take the conversation back to citizenship and ask you two questions. One that I think I need to explain a little bit, but the first is, how do you actually define citizenship? Because what I'm learning and what I'm seeing, or over time, or what I'm at least struggling with, is that citizenship is a sort of currency. And you spoke a little bit about like how it is informed by your experience, how it has come to be for you, but you're not actually saying what it is. And you're speaking about a radical citizenship as well as the responsibility of citizenship when you're working at the levels, at the hyperlocal level and state and federal level. And I don't think, at least I'm not yet convinced that the term means the same thing in both spaces. So I'd just love to hear.
It doesn't. I thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out.
And then the follow-up, which is related.
She's a PhD student. Of
I
course
know.
she's got
Yeah,
a follow-up.
I do. It's not long.
There's a big question you just asked. The first one was big, and I want to get other voices in as well.
I do, so I just want to put them together because I'd love to hear what you think that definition means for urban citizenship, where cities and states create policies that protect and serve immigrants, particularly Haitian folks, in response to federal.
So I'm gonna cheat and say that there isn't time to answer the second part of your question, because I think that requires a PhD level thesis on my part. But I will say this on your first question. For me, it's about gaining a purchase on the claim that you have in society. That's what citizenship means for me. And so I'm using the term with some fluidity. I'm not using it just to make reference to those who have taken an oath to the sovereign state that they're in. I'm instead using it in a very fluid way to describe this kind of contractual relationship that exists in terms of both obligation towards the individual and responsibility back to community. That is a kind of a point of negotiation that always has to be present. I also want to, before becoming the president of Center for American Progress, I had the privilege of leading the second largest private philanthropy in the world, which is focused on this question of accountability of governance and in a way, accountability of the individual to the broader collective. That was the Open Society Foundation. And I believe that taking up your citizenship means that you're playing a role in interrogating this machinery of accountability that has to exist in free and open societies. Every government, if you have a true democracy, it means that there's an opportunity towards correction of the direction of government. So being a citizen means that you have to take up your responsibility to do the work of that correction with a group larger than just yourself at the level of the individual. The second question is a bigger conversation than we can have here in this forum. It's an important question, though.
One more, Robert. We'll get a couple. Everybody will get a chance. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Hi, thank you very much. I'm Robert Adler. I'm an undergraduate history major at Brooklyn College, so I appreciate you being here and focusing on history. So my question is in relation to a lot of the current talk in terms of geopolitical shifts between rising competition between three major blocs that are kind of forming between the US, the EU, and China leading kind of conglomerate of the BRICS union type of nations. And a central part of that is starting to be competition over in Africa with a lot of African nations and
Starting to be? Starting to be? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Starting to be a new era of competition for political influence and for economic influence. And I guess the question is also how you can relate that to history as well in terms of the history of imperialism and history of nationalism and also of a lot of Cold War influence politics, and how you can relate that to what you see as the future of the continent and a lot of nations there that are impacted.
That is a vast question. So look. If I can, I think that sometimes we have a tendency to over-explain geopolitical contests in the world, and we have a tendency to push it all through the lens of values, where it's really at the end of the day, it should be understood through the space of interests, powerful interests. If we want to understand why Taiwan is in the news, we should appreciate the competition that exists between the US and China for the control of the chips, the microchips industry into the future. So in a way, we should pull back from understanding Taiwan as a space of small d democracy contestation and understand it as a space of economic competition between two enormous powers, because then I think that pulls us back from the hawkish Cold War rhetoric that some are kind of blithely marching towards, new Cold War rhetoric some are blithely marching towards on China, and gets us to ask a different set of questions about that space, but also the Africa space as well. I would, everything old is new again on Africa. The way that we have a new race to the bottom on the extractives on the continent, on new energy in the continent. The divides are exactly the same And regrettably, the outcomes are not marching toward the benefit of Africans themselves. I'm going to give you a quick anecdote from a ministerial conference I went to some years ago on trade. I'm not going to name the nation, but I was sitting in the middle of a conference space and the power shut down. And it took forever to get it back up. And I leaned over to the trade minister for that country and I said, what's going on? Why is this taking so long? And they said, well, all the instructions for this convention center are in Mandarin because it wasn't built by us and we're waiting for the Mandarin-speaking engineer to come and turn the lights back on. Okay, so that's like a little illustration of like this bigger, broader thing that is playing out in Africa, playing out in Latin America. You're going to continue to see a downward pressure on public goods and services as a consequence of the implications of the climate crisis. That's going to play into the new scramble on both of those continents that I think is going to really drive some really interesting geopolitical tensions in the very, very, very near future. I think that those of us who are concerned not to move towards conflict should always be pressing for opportunities for the US, for China. I'm not even going to name Russia right now, even though you mentioned BRICS, but US and China to find opportunities for cooperation even within competition. I'll give you another example from Africa. Grand Inga Dam in the country that I was born, Congo, could be a source of enormous power in the Congo and all up and down the continent from all the way down to the Cape. It's not the case now. Proper investment by China, US together, and our private sector could motivate that in a space and opportunity for cooperation. I could give a dozen other examples in other parts of the world, but I always want to kind of lean into this notion of cooperation because there are some others who are, I think, going to march us into this zero-sum Cold War that I think is going to be a disaster for the global South yet again. I'm not giving the answer to the question that you asked, but I'm giving the answer that I want to have. Thank you.
We have a reception outside and the opportunity. Very briefly, you certainly may. So brief question, brief answer, and then we'll go to the reception. Please.
Yeah, my two questions are related to Haitian issues. Haitians issues. If you don't take my pictures, I will remove the mask, but I will not remove the mask if you take my pictures. Period. Haitians are vote many elected officials. There are many Haitian elected officials, but I do not sense a strong sense of power or benefits that are coming from these elected officials in New York City, in New York. I do not know about other states. I would like to know what the Haitian community can do to not only vote them in power, but to make sure we get the benefits of voting them in power.
I appreciate the question and want to meet you in the right spirit with that question. I will tell you that unless you are Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries or Nancy Pelosi before Hakeem Jeffries, Kevin McCarthy, there are actually very few individual elected officials in the United States of America, in city councils, state legislatures, or even in Congress that have that much power. Not that many of them. I just want to be clear, right? So you have a group of Haitian Americans who have been elected in cities like Chicago, New York, Miami, out in Boston as well, who are just kind of coming into the point of, the nascent point of their individual seniority in these seats. Some of them have been reelected. We have like a second generation coming in Florida. We're still kind of in the first generation in New York. They're just coming into their seniority, into their individual committee power in state legislatures and eventually in spaces like Congress, but they are so far from being able to have actual power. That's the first part of it. The second part, though, and this goes back to the example that I gave the president at the beginning of the conversation in making the comparison between Cuban Americans and Haitian Americans. Cuban Americans could care less about the individual power that Marco Rubio has. They don't even think about Marco Rubio. They think about the associations that they're building in Little Havana and elsewhere, right? They are coming together across business interests, across faith interests, across economic and education divides within their community and saying, here's the Venn diagram of the things that we want. Here are the spaces that as a community, we've got some consensus. Here are the things that we're going to advocate and lobby for here in our state and in the federal government. And here are the things that we're going to hold our own electeds accountable on, and then other electeds beyond our diaspora accountable on. So for them, it starts with the germ of that consensus and builds out from there. There are other diasporic communities that I would point to. You could look at the history of Irish Americans in cities like New York and what it took for them to finally take up their own agency here, and then eventually how they affected US foreign policy towards Ireland as Irish American elected officials and activists, which they really, really, really did. We're so far from that, but we do have an increasingly mature diaspora in this country, a sophisticated civil society back home in Haiti. There's an ability to kind of figure out what that Venn diagram looks like, to build that consensus, and to invest in organization. That's the one thing that we have not done as a diaspora. We don't, I can say this as a Haitian American, we have not trusted one another enough beyond our divides to say, all right, we're pulling our resources, we're creating this pact together, we're creating this association together. We may not agree on everything, we're gonna agree on these 3 things, and we're gonna go get these things done. That's where real power comes from.
Yeah. One last question, quick one. If the Americans...
So we're going to have to... Anyone who has
would you be interested in becoming president of Haiti?
I'm happy to take your question.
Would you be interested in becoming president of Haiti?
Thank you for
Merci,
that.
Sam. That's a curse, though. You could put it on me.
Thank you for that. Listen, if you have additional questions, the ambassador will be outside at the reception. We encourage you to enjoy the reception right outside in the lobby. And boy, what an incredible discussion this was, Ambassador. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all.